We are so excited, and to those of you who are here in person, thank you for braving the roads. I left Michigan when it was 67 degrees yesterday, so this is quite the change. But my name is Shelby DeVries. I am the Assistant Director of the Center for Conservation Excellence, which is a program at the National Wild Turkey Federation that is working on conservation legal education. So kind of came to be because of the animal rights movement that started in the early 2000s. And so the effort with our program is not the ideologies, but the actual law of wildlife law. So we have started with introducing wildlife law courses in law colleges. And now the next wave is continuing legal education seminars. So you guys are at the first of the continuing legal education seminars, which is co-hosted today by the Center for Conservation Excellence and the Firearms Research Center. So with that being said, I will pass the mic.
Okay. Thank you, Shelby, and thanks everyone for coming. I'll just take a couple of minutes also. I'm George Mocsary. I'm a professor of law here at the University of Wyoming College of Law. And we've got folks here from Wyoming, but also as far as Alaska, North Dakota, Florida, and some other states, Arkansas, I think we've got someone zooming in from. So we appreciate all of your being here. As Shelby said, this event today is co-hosted between the Center for Conservation Excellence and the Firearms Research Center here at the University of Wyoming. I'm the director of that center, and the center started to fill a need. There's lots of talk out there about firearms, the Second Amendment, gun violence, all of these things. But we found that all of the talk is sort of in hyperbole, and that there isn't sort of a lot of clear thinking based on law and fact out there on it. And we've also found that a great deal of the community, the American community that's works with firearms, that owns, sells, buys, uses firearms, isn't represented in that dialogue. So we hear lots of talk of social science, lots of talk of the Second Amendment, lots of talk of history, or somewhat less talk of history, but we don't hear, for example, about the hunters, right? About the conservationists who rely on hunters and hunting and firearms to keep their animal populations in check. We'll talk about that a little bit more in my session today. We don't hear from law enforcement or military, right? We don't hear from the diversification groups. We don't hear from the hunting therapy groups and so on. There's an entire list of people and list of organizations and lists of interests that are involved with firearms, that use firearms, and in whose lives firearms are a daily part. And so the goal of the center is to bring all those people into the conversation. And so that's why we're here today. Today is the first event, the first large event anyway, excuse me, in which we're going to do that. Of course, hunting and conservation law, firearms are integral to that topic, right? And so are non-gun arms, by the way, right? If you're talking, there's bow hunting, for example, and crossbow hunting. So we're here today to start that conversation in the context of conservation law. We're calling today's event a CLE Plus. That's what we've called it. So everyone who's here, you can get CLE for it. Everyone who's present, and thank you very much for coming. We've got about 100 people with us today. But we intended the event to be accessible to everyone. So we've got law students here as well, who are coming to learn about the topic, who are interested in various facets of the topic. We've got folks from across campus, from our Haub School and from our Energy and Natural Resources program. We've also got people from out in the community. An owner of a gun shop in town is here with us today via Zoom. So the idea is for it to be open to everyone, to pass some information on and to start a conversation about the topic and all the various specific topics that we'll be discussing today. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian. There he is. Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself, a few words, and then assuming you end early, though, feel free to speak for 15 minutes. We'll take a short break till 9 and we'll start our first session. So thanks, everyone.
Hey, thank you. Good morning. My name is Brian Nesvik. I have the distinct pleasure to be the head coach for the best wildlife management team in the country. I do have a few biases there, but I serve as the director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and have served with the department for 27 or 28 years now and have been in Wyoming my whole life. And I'll tell you that as I looked at your agenda here today, these issues that you're going to discuss today and hear presentations on are real from the perspective of a game and fish director. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. You will, for those of you that there's probably not many in the room that came from out of state, but on Zoom, today is the day that in Wyoming we transition from summer straight to winter. It's like 10 degrees and we have snowy roads. And this is also the day that if you were here, if you drove up the road, you'd see what would appear today on the side of all of our interstates is these large posts with great big logging chains hanging off of it. And those are what we call windsocks in Wyoming, because this starts that time of the year where the wind blows about every single day, especially in this part of the world. But as I looked at your agenda and I thought about the things that take up a lot of my time each day, there is a lot of alignment. And, I looked at the, state authority and the North American model of wildlife management. There is not a day that goes by where I don't have time invested in at least one of those two topics. There's a continual, and it's even hotter recently, this continued debate and a lot of diverse perspective on who truly should have the role for managing wildlife across the states. We certainly support strongly the notion that states have the role to manage all wildlife within the state unless they are have some kind of a classification under the Endangered Species Act, but it's not quite that clear cut. You start talking about species like grizzly bears and their delisting, wolves, gray wolves and their delisting and reintroduction into Wyoming and many other states. You look at sage grouse and what's going on with them, a west-wide species that's certainly of great conservation need. And there's a whole lot of folks that want to have a role in figuring out how those critters are managed. And it really creates a lot of contention at times. And like I said, diverse perspective on who really ought to be sitting at the table making decisions on those kind of species. I'll give you a current example that is one of the challenges we're dealing with right now, and that we have this really cool opportunity to have bighorn sheep in an area where they once inhabited in the center part of the state. They were extirpated, 100 years ago. Reintroduction efforts early in the mid 1900s or early in the 1900s and the mid 1900s were not successful for a variety of reasons. And we now have an opportunity to put sheep back in there again. And actually, most of the domestic livestock industry thinks it's a good idea, but we're really struggling to get across the finish line because of the fear of, and based on past actions with specifically with authority over wildlife management. Some of those domestic livestock producers are fearful that once sheep are there, that federal lands that are in the area that they rely on for grazing, that on those lands, the federal government will make decisions in the name of bighorn sheep that will have a detrimental effect on the livestock industry. Perfect example of where the lines get blurred between state and federal management of wildlife. The right to hunt, fish, and trap in Wyoming. It is in our Constitution now. It's been there for 10 or 15 years, I think, is when it was adopted, and that is something that continually comes up. There's oftentimes discussion about trapping and what role it should play, and it's in our Constitution as a right of our citizens in the state. Ethics and hunting technology. We just had, just last week, we were having this discussion about what's ethical when you talk about different types of firearms, different methods of take, long range shooting. What's ethical to one person may not be ethical to another person. The use of crossbows and archery equipment, the use of dogs in hunting, the use of trail cameras, believe it or not. A lot of new technology that used to not be there that has created user conflicts, both on public and private land. that oftentimes bears its head. And I noticed that you're going to have some discussions about some of that stuff here today, specifically with ethics. Migration corridors, another one of those issues that has some bearing with both federal and state management authorities. In Wyoming, we are home to some really tremendous migration corridors where we have animals that move, mule deer as an example, that move well over 100 miles each spring and each fall to move between summer, transitional, and winter ranges. And the protection of those corridors is very important to the state. A lot of those corridors transition across both private and federal lands. And the approach that we've taken in Wyoming is to really focus in on the most important corridors and those habitats within the corridors that are absolutely the highest use, the most important, and focusing surface uses and surface disturbances in those corridors outside of the corridor. And that again has been another one of those very contentious issues. We got our governor signed an executive order after a pretty extensive process to shape that policy in Wyoming. So far it's worked quite well, but we know there will be conflict with it in the future as future development proposals. And when I say development, I mean all kinds of development: urban development, oil and gas development, recreational development, access development, that kind of stuff is all something that down the road is going to have a bearing on those migration corridors. So anyway, my point is, first of all, welcome. I appreciate what you all do to continue your professional development, professional education. And the stuff you're going to talk about today is real world. And I wish you the absolute best and appreciate the time here this morning.